What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. Really excited to talk to you guys about a bunch of new lakes today and break them down for some spring patterns. And if this is your first time watching one of my videos, definitely go down and check out my main channel page. You can go down below and hit my little icon, the fish with the hook down below, and you'll be taken to my YouTube page where you can find shorter form videos where I break down bass fishing electronics, areas, I do on the water videos where I'm actually fishing, all kinds of stuff. And so this is my long form live stream format where I break down Patreon members' lakes, which is a subscription service that people sign up for and they can submit lakes for me to break down with Navionics and Google Earth. And it's a lot of information to take in if it's one of your first videos. So definitely go check out some of the other videos on my channel first if you're a diehard bass fisherman and want to learn more. And if you're here for the stream, really good to see everyone as always. Let me see who's on over here. We have JT as always, 30 minutes before. Ulysses, Bill, we got Mike, we got the Bastard 2025, Dan, Robert, Bobby, Roger, Bob, Dan, so many guys, Steve, Ian, Ken, we got Joseph, Seth, Clayton, we got Steve, Brian, so many guys in here. Good to see everyone. I think it's awesome that you guys are calling out where you're from and kind of representing all around the country. It's actually pretty cool to see. I actually found this really cool analytics page on my website, and it actually showed which states all of my traffic to my website was coming from, and it even broke it down to specific areas. And so one thing I'm going to be offering in the next month are stock map breakdowns on my website, where you can actually go in and purchase breakdowns of your lake in your area, and it's just going to be a stock map that goes up on the webpage and anyone can buy it. And I'm going to actually use the location data from my website to do that. And so as a data guy for a living, it's really fun to kind of dig into that data and see where a lot of my traffic's coming from. And for those who are interested, a lot of it's coming from Texas, Georgia, Tennessee, and Arkansas. And so those seem to be my biggest states. Obviously, there's a few other big states like Florida, California, places like that. But that's where a lot of my representation is coming from. So shout out to everyone from those states. And for tonight, I am really excited to break down some really cool lakes. We have 3 lakes today. Again, these lakes were submitted by my Patreon members on my Patreon page. And over there in the bottom right corner is a link to my Patreon page. And you can join for different subscription tiers and have your lakes suggested to my live streams. And I can randomly select them every week to do on my stream. And another thing I'm actually going to start doing a lot more, I've done it in the past, but I'm going to start doing it every week going forward here, is actually posting polls on what videos I am going to be making each week. And so right after this live stream, I'm going to actually post a poll for this week's video and see what you guys want me to make this week for a video topic. And so that's been really helpful in the past to help me figure out which videos to make and which videos you guys want to be watching. And I'm definitely going to try to be posting a video every week going forward. It's been pretty hectic the last couple of weeks, so I've kind of fallen off that schedule, but definitely excited to definitely excited to break down a bunch of different lakes, make a bunch more videos, and talk to more of you guys through my website. So other than that, we got 70 guys on first 3 minutes here, so that's really good. And lakes for today, if you look at the stream schedule up there in the middle right side, we'll be looking at Lake Limestone in Texas, which is kind of a sandwich between Dallas, Houston, and Austin. And then we have Lake Sinclair in Georgia. And then we have Percy Priest Lake in Nashville, Tennessee, or just outside Nashville. So some really good lakes to look at today. And so without further ado, I'm going to jump straight into these lakes. And cool thing about these lakes also, before I jump in actually, is that all of them are going to be kind of in different times of the year. Obviously right now it's the end of April going into May 1st tomorrow, and that means that up north there's going to be fish that are in pre-spawn where there's still potentially ice on the lake. There's going to be fish in the Midwest, maybe in Indiana region where there's still full pre-spawn. There's going to be bass spawning like they are here in Arkansas, Tennessee region, and then there's going to be bass that are already post-spawn down in Texas and Georgia. So going to be able to look through a lot of different types of patterns and show you guys a lot of different cool stuff tonight. So now without further ado, let me switch over here real quick to some Navionics and we'll start breaking down lakes. And as I'm going through this, guys, if you do have any questions for me about what I'm talking about or any of the lakes or patterns, please feel free to leave a comment in the chat. And all you have to do is put @FishTheMoment and then type your question. And then if you can leave like 7 or 8 question marks at the end of your question, it helps me find them in the chat later. And I'll try to get through as many as I can during the stream. And I'll try to answer all of them after the stream as well. And I may miss a few here and there, but I should be able to get to most of them. So 93 people on, which is awesome. So anyways, tons of people on here. Didn't get to say hi to everyone, but what's up, Keith? What's up, Tyler? Rhonda? We got David. We got Neil. All kinds of people in here. My top spinner. Good to see everyone. So I will get through some questions here in a minute, but I'm going to jump straight in to my breakdown of Lake Limestone in Texas. Okay, so Limestone, Texas, if we take a look at this lake just from a high overview, you can see that the lake is a pretty shallow lake. It has about 30 feet of water in the middle of the lake. It maybe has somewhere close to 40 down by the dam, but really about 30 feet is as deep as you're going to get, which means that this fishery is probably going to fish pretty shallow. There's not going to be a ton of fish offshore, though we probably can still find some off the bank. And then if we switch over to our Google Earth image of this, give me 1 second. Switch over to Google Earth here. We'll be able to see that this lake is pretty clear almost on the lower end. I wouldn't say it's super clear, but you may have 3 to 4 feet of visibility on the lower end down here at certain times of the year. And as you move up to the mid lake, it gets a little bit dirtier, maybe 1.5 2 foot of visibility, and then it gets pretty dirty as you move up the lake here underneath this bridge and back into this creek. And I actually really like this lake because it sets up a lot like Lake Maumelle, which is where I did a lot of my fishing when I was younger. And so I think I should be able to give some pretty good tips on this lake just based on the fact that I spent a lot of time on Lake Maumelle. So one thing you'll notice about this lake that's pretty interesting is that there's a ton of standing timber in this lake. And so like a lot of lakes in Texas, you're going to see that there are a ton of stumps and trees all over this lake. Let me try to find a good image for you so you guys can see that. Let's see here. Here we go. So you can see right here, if this will work. My Google Earth's kind of slow tonight, guys, but right here you can see there's a ton of trees out here in the middle of these pockets. And I'm sure that a lot of you guys around the country deal with lakes that have all this standing timber. And obviously that makes it hard to run around the lake because there's so many trees. It's also a little bit daunting because every pocket looks pretty good because there's so many trees in the water. And so I'm going to talk about on Lake Limestone today ways that I target the timber and ways that I target stuff that's not the timber, because there's 2 approaches. You can either focus on the timber and use that as your primary source of cover and then really look for the differences and the irregularities in those timber areas, or you can completely ignore the timber and focus more on the bottom composition, the bottom contours, or the actual structure underneath the water. And so the first thing I'm going to talk about is how you actually use the timber to locate bass rather than just the contours. Before we do that, though, Bruce Clayton with the $101 super chat. Thank you so much, Bruce. In anticipation of another awesome evening in my lake, well worth my support. Thank you. Thanks so much, Bruce. Really, really appreciate that. And I got the next top spot, jumping over Thomas there. We're eking over every time, so really appreciate all the support, Bruce, since really the beginning of these live streams, the beginning of my channel, so really appreciate that. Really appreciate everyone who's been donating to my channel as well on Patreon, going to my websites, booking one-on-one fishing lessons, buying map breakdowns. I mean, the map breakdowns have been selling out in like 45 minutes after I post them on my website, and so you guys are awesome. You just buy them out right away, and demand is through the roof, which is great. And people who've been getting my map breakdowns have been really liking them, and I've loved making them. So again, thank you so much for all the support. So with all of these lakes, like I said, with this timber, there's a couple things you kind of want to pay attention to. So first with this timber is one of the best ways to find good timber areas is to find places where you have very little timber in the lake. And so if you go onto the lower end of this lake, further down the lake towards the dam, there's a little bit less timber through here, though there is still some. And so if we go like around this point here, you'll notice that there's not that many trees sticking out here in the water. There are a few though, and some of these pockets have trees and timber out in front of them. But if we go down some of these banks, you'll notice that there's a lot of timber that's set up here around these points and stuff, and then you get to a point like this. And if you look at it, there's really only two pieces of visible timber off this flat point. And this pocket in here is covered in timber everywhere. And obviously, you can go and you can fish down these places where there's lots of timber, and you can fish them with a crankbait or a spinnerbait or a jig, fishing down the bank and out in the timber. The problem with that, though, sometimes is that there's so much there that it's kind of just a guessing game of where the fish are going to be. You just have to kind of just fish around and hope you find some fish. And so one thing I like to do, especially on lakes where there's a ton of timber, is look for stretches on your banks where there's isolated trees off the bank. And these isolated trees are amazing for bass to set up on because basically it's the only piece of cover down this bank. There's really just flat mud bank here, and then you have two nice little trees sticking out. Before I get there, Siren Bailey, thank you so much for the $50 super chat. Siren was one of the guys who suggested one of our lakes today, so thank you so much for support on Patreon and also for the super chat, Siren. I think, was that Siren? I think that was you. Maybe it wasn't Siren who suggested the lake. I think it may have been you. Maybe it was not. But either way, thank you so much for the super chat. I really, really appreciate it. And appreciate all the support. I see you commenting on my videos all the time and always giving me some really kind words. So really appreciate all the support, Siren. So, hope I'm pronouncing your name right too. I've been terrible with names recently. I don't really know why. I think it's the live stream nerves. But either way, so like I was talking about with the points and stuff like that, you have these nice points that have like very little cover on them. And then you have these two isolated trees out here. And these trees can be really good in the pre-spawn and in the post-spawn. So the pre-spawns when the water temperatures are in the high 40s to mid 50s up to the 60s even. And these bass will stage on these isolated trees out here before they move back in these pockets to spawn. And then they also will set up on these after they move out of these pockets. So after they spawn, they'll move out of these pockets out to these isolated trees. And again, there's probably going to be fish sitting up in these trees as well. But instead of having to pitch on like 70 or 80 or 90 different trees, pitching a jig or fishing a spinnerbait by them, here you only have to fish 2 trees. And so it's a lot easier to pick apart these areas, and it's a lot more high percentage because you don't have to spend as much time casting and fishing everything. Really, you can make 4 or 5 casts per tree here that's isolated out there, and your chance of catching fish per tree is way higher. And so, you can go around this lake and you can find these isolated trees. There's an isolated tree out here, another one out here in the center of this pocket, some isolated, a stump right out here. You can kind of go down this bank and you can see there are some stretches where there's just isolated trees. And then you can see it gets really thick again. There's trees everywhere. So going down these banks looking for these isolated patches of trees is a really good deal and can definitely help you narrow down your fishing there. Second thing I like to do on these lakes that have a ton of standing timber are going to places where you see right here a place where a tree line ends or a group of trees ends. So if you look right here off this point, there are trees everywhere, all over the bank here. Then all of a sudden, they stop. And from here to here, there are literally no trees. So this to this, there's like barely any trees visible on your map. And there's a big hole in the trees. And what I like to do is actually fish these edges where the trees go from being very, very thick to a little bit less thick. And if we kind of scroll out for those who are fishing this lake, it's right off this point. And so you can go in here and you can see, okay, these trees are set up and they really stop hard line right here. And so what I would do is I would try to fish the edge of these trees with a jig, maybe flipping like a 1/2 ounce jig, fishing a 10-inch worm down those trees, both up shallow in 3-4 feet of water, but also out deeper because in the post-spawn, specifically in the post-spawn or in the pre-spawn even, these bass will set out and they'll suspend in these trees. And the trees may be in 10 feet of water, 15 feet of water, and those fish will suspend up in those trees in 3 to 7 feet. And you can drop a 1/2 ounce jig or a 10-inch worm with like a 1/4 3/8 ounce weight, drop it down there, shake it through those trees, pull it up over the tops of those trees, stuff like that, and those fish will destroy it. And I mean, you can find fish in trees and stuff out in here as well. But the problem with that is that there's so many to fish. So that's a really good way to kind of figure out how to, find fish in these trees. And then the last way you can do it is you can find some trees, especially in the post spawn, that are a little bit further off the bank. And so, like right out here, you can see there's a nice big tree, and there's a few trees off this point. And I'll go over to Navionics in a minute and show you guys the structure out here as well. But you can see his point sticks out here, and there's some trees. What you can do is you can basically just idle your boat over the top of some of these tree areas and look for places where you see bait and fish in the trees. And I'm hoping to make a lot more videos about electronics here coming up, guys, once I get more time out on the lake. And I'll show you what fish in trees look like, so you can graph over spots and say, oh, this stretch of trees has fish in it, this doesn't. But the easiest way to call it out is if you're using your fish finder, use the traditional 2D sonar on your fish finder, and you'll graph over these points. And what happens is that the trees will show up as either one color like yellow or blue or whatever you have your graph palette set to, color palette set to, and the fish will show up as a different color. So if the trees are yellow, the fish may show up as red, or if it's blue, the fish may show up as red. Stuff like that. And it all depends on your color palette and which graph you're using. But normally the fish will come back with a different color return, and you'll be able to identify them through these trees. And then you can just graph down in front of these areas and just graph around in those trees and look for bass. And that works really well in the early pre-spawn when the water temperatures are in the 40s, maybe high or low 50s, or in the post-spawn when the water temperatures get up to about 72 to 75 degrees. Those bass will pull out into these trees a little bit more, and you can graph them. So those are a couple ways you can kind of break down the timber on this lake. And then obviously, in the post-spawn, just basic patterns, you can skip some of these boat docks with jigs, fishing a fluke through boat docks. That's a great way to catch fish. Just running banks, flatter banks with topwaters, with buzzbait, stuff like that. Post-spawn bass fishing isn't super hard if you're just going to just go catch fish. You can just run down the bank, either skip boat docks with a fluke or a jig, or throw a buzzbait in the topwater down the bank, and you'll catch fish. But if you want to get a little bit more advanced, you can actually, if I switch back over to Navionics, you can try to find some fish offshore. And that's how I like to spend most of my time fishing in the post-spawn. I don't spend a lot of time actually on the bank, other than maybe the first hour of the morning. And a lot of times I'll just kind of pick a bank that looks good to me. Just, it looks like it has some good laydowns or something, and I'll just run down that bank with a buzzbait for the first 45 minutes. Not very scientific or very specific there. And then what I'll do after that is I'll come out and I'll start looking for areas offshore. And offshore is a really good deal here on this lake, because you do have some good drops and some good edges that are in, let's say, 7 to 15 feet of water. And again, if we were looking at the lake earlier, we said that the bottom of the lake was really clear. Not super clear, but kind of clear, like 4 foot of visibility. Mid lake had 2 foot of visibility. Top end of the lake had a foot of visibility or less. And so on this mid lake section, where you have about 2 foot of visibility, these bass are normally going to set up in the summertime in maybe 15 to 17 feet of water. That's as deep as they'll get when you have about 2 to 3 foot of visibility. They're not going to get super, super deep. And in the post-spawn, they'll stay actually pretty shallow all the way through about mid-June. Maybe in Texas, they'll move out there a little bit earlier, like mid-May to end of May, just because it's so much hotter. And so really what you can look for is you can look for places that are between 15 feet of water and the bank basically, and look for any good contour lines you see there. So for example, if we take a look off here, you can see that there's a nice rounded point here, and there's actually a subtle underwater point right here. It almost creates like a high spot right here. This right here probably is going to have some timber and stuff on top of it, but you're not really going to focus on fishing the timber. The timber just happens to be there. Instead, you're going to focus on this contour line change, which is this little high spot. And what you can do is look for, graph over it, look for fish, or just pull up and know that there's a high spot here and start pitching your jigs or your worms or fishing a spinnerbait or something through these trees. And a lot of times you can find some good fish, especially since this little spot here is right on the edge of a creek channel. You can see that creek channel. It's really subtle, but it kind of winds in right across this point. And there's a high spot here next to the creek channel between the bank. Really good spot right there. Another spot I really like is you actually have a nice little high spot out here that's about 14 feet of water further off the bank, kind of similar to this spot here, to be honest. Another spot that I saw that I really liked was up here. There's a couple, actually, a bunch of spots here, but you can see right here there's actually a nice long point or ridge that sticks out here, and there's a little bit of a saddle right here, so it's about 10 feet or 12 feet of water right here, and it comes up to 9 foot and 11 foot on both sides. And a lot of times these fish will set up on these high spots on both sides, like this point or this high spot. Sometimes they'll set up in the center of this saddle, and all you have to do is basically just work around the edge of this point, flipping a jig, fishing a worm, trying to cover around this point. And especially when the water temperatures are above 75 degrees, these bass love to set up on these spots before they get out to their full summertime areas. So normally, these fish actually may even summer out here, further out here, but then in the or the post spawn, when the water temperatures hit like 70, 75, they'll be further up on top of these points, a little bit shallower, still off the bank, maybe just hanging out in some of those trees. A few other areas that look really good. You have a really nice point that sticks out here. Got about 9 foot of water up on top, probably has some standing timber up there. Great spot for a worm or a jig. Same thing right here. We have another long point that sticks out here with a high spot. This kind of has almost like a nice ridge feel to it. And then there's a deeper creek channel that runs straight by it. So that's going to be a really good spot. Also, since it's right in the mouth of all these spawning pockets, this actually could be a really good spot almost right now for bass, especially those first fish that start moving offshore. And a lot of times on these, as you move further up this lake, you're going to get to that dirtier water. And those fish in the post spawn, they may set up in 3 to 4 feet of water offshore. So like off the tip of this island, for example, you have 4 foot of water right here. Bass can set up on that 4 feet of water offshore here all the way through mid-May or even into June on a lot of lakes. And so you don't be afraid to fish offshore in 4 to 5 feet of water, especially when you have less than 2 foot of visibility in your water. If you have like 2 foot to a foot and a half visibility, or let's say a foot to a foot and a half visibility, those fish will set up in that 4 to 5, 6 feet of water all throughout May, even into the beginning of June. And this is a really good looking area right here. Again, in the mouth of some spawning pockets, also some good kind of points and stuff sticking out here. So a lot of good stuff on this lake to fish. Hopefully that gives you an idea of what I would be looking for on Limestone, and hopefully that will help you out going forward. And I want to let's see here. I want to thank Ira Gooden for suggesting this lake. Again, that suggestion was made on my Patreon page. It's Ira, probably Ira Gooden. And so thank you so much for supporting the channel, Ira. If you haven't seen this video yet on the live stream, hopefully you catch this after this video gets posted back to YouTube, so thank you so much. And again, if you want to join my Patreon page, over there in the bottom right corner, you can join. You can put your lakes in for my live stream, so you can have your lake looked at. You can also vote on upcoming video ideas, and I'm coming up with even more perks for my Patreon members in the near future here, so definitely look out for that. This area looks really good, by the way, too. Can't stop myself from pointing out good areas, guys. It's like my addiction is finding the juice on all these lakes. But anyways, right here, nice little high spot. That could be great in the post spawn, even right here. Or, ooh, that's like a little subtle point. I need to stop because now I'm never going to get to the next lakes. There's so many good spots. If you guys want me to break down your lakes with lake breakdowns, here's a nice little ditch. Oh, basically what I would do in my lake breakdowns, guys, I know I don't have that many available, unfortunately, just because of the lack of time and stuff like that on my schedule at the moment. But what I do is I'll just like take a screenshot of like this area of the lake, and I'll just boom, take that screenshot right there, and I'll go through and I'll say, okay, here's a nice subtle point here. I'll call it out. I'll call out this hump. I'll call out this ridge, this little ditch that swings in here, and then maybe this little high spot. There's a nice point out here, and then you have like a deeper stretch or a deeper point right here with a deeper stretch of boat docks. All areas are like a deep stretch of boat docks right here. All areas you can catch fish. And what I would do is basically put in a PowerPoint, a breakdown of all the spots, the baits I would use in them, what the spots are, detailed description on how to fish these areas, all kinds of stuff. And so pretty good product I'm offering there. I guess I'm tooting my own horn there, but I do think it's really good, and it's definitely helped a lot of guys out. And I think that if there's anyone in the comments actually or in the stream who's had one of my lake breakdowns, love to get your feedback in the chat and just let people know what you think. But enough of that. Let's jump to our next lake now, which is Lake Sinclair in Georgia. Okay, so here we go. Lake Sinclair in Georgia. So as you can see, this lake is a very long kind of, I don't even know what you want to call it. It spreads out in a lot of different directions. It's kind of a long, big lake, and it's at the bottom of Lake Oconee, which is another really good lake in this Georgia area. Pretty close over here to some of the lakes you may be familiar with, like Clark's Hill, Lake Hartwell, lakes like that. But it's just down the way. There's Lake Sidney Lanier. So just to give you an idea of what types of lakes are kind of around it, it's going to set up very similar to a lot of those lakes. Maybe not perfectly similar because it's more in Georgia, and the lakes in Georgia are normally going to be a little bit dirtier, a little bit shallower, but they look very similar to the lakes over there in the South Carolina region, kind of the area around there. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what these lakes are going to kind of set up like. And to give you a better idea, let's jump over here to Google Earth really quick. While that's loading, let me swing through these comments just really quick because I've not got to you guys real quick. See what everyone's doing. 131 people. Mike Seacrest, $4.99 super chat. Thanks so much for the super chat. Really appreciate that, Mike or Michael. What's more important, cover or structure? Would you fish good structure with no cover? Great question. So normally when there's structure, the way I like to think about it, if I go back over here to second, let me switch back over here really quick to answer that because that's a great question and it's kind of relevant here. A lot of times when you have a good piece of structure, so let's go back over here to this area that I was really liking. So you have a nice looking point that sticks out here. Actually, let's find a better example. Right here, this was a good one. So if you look right here, we had this high spot. So in general, I prefer a good piece of or good structure rather than having specific cover for the most part. But a lot of times your best cover is also going to happen on your best structure. And so to kind of explain that, what I mean by that is like this high spot here. This high spot is going to have most likely have a rocky bottom, because if you think about the way the high spot is formed, the bottom of the water or the bottom of the lake is raised up a little bit higher, and it's normally because when the lake erodes the bottom, it'll erode away the silt and the sand and stuff like that first, and any rock or hard bottom is going to stay elevated off the bottom. So that's why you get these high spots. So you're going to have good cover in the form of rock in those cases. Also, when you have like shallow spots like this spot up here and you have a lot of wind pushing up against it, there's a lot of chances that even though this is a nice point, there's also a chance that there's going to be shell beds or shells or something that blow up on top of this point just from the wind and the current, and you have all these nice stuff. So it's really cool to find good structure and then just happen to find cover on it. So a lot of times they go hand in hand, but there are times when you just have a point like this or a ditch or something. Like if we go back down here, so many times I've fished and I found like literally a ditch like down here where you have this ditch that winds into this pocket and there's nothing in the ditch. There's no timber down there, there's no brush, there's no anything, but these are used as migration routes, and these bass will set up on these ditches and you won't see anything down there. There's nothing to see other than just a big group of bass. And so a lot of times I find that structure is a lot more important, but a lot of times you have to find that good mix of the right structure and cover at the same time. So kind of answers your question, Michael, but at the same time, it's kind of both. They go hand in hand, but I look for structure first before I look for cover about 90% of the time. While I was doing that explanation, Tim Russell with a $99 super chat, $99.99. Thank you so much, Tim. Really appreciate that. Man, you guys are treat me really well tonight. Thank you so much. I don't know if I'm doing a better job than normal or what's going on, but I really appreciate all the support, guys. I really, really do. And I got some pretty awesome announcements to make over the next month, and so stay tuned for that. That's just a sneak peek. So I'll let you guys speculate on what that might be in the comments, but yeah, got some really big announcements to make over the next month. And so, other than that, let me switch back over to Lake Sinclair because I know that let's see here actually who suggested Lake Sinclair real quick. So Lake Sinclair, that was suggested by Calvin Troop. So Calvin, if you're watching on the stream, how's it going, man? Glad that you are, or thank you so much for joining my Patreon page, and I hope you're enjoying this lake breakdown, even though we haven't got started yet. And if you're watching it back after the fact, be sure to leave a comment down below. I'd love to, hear what you thought of the breakdown of the lake and if you found it helpful. So thank you again for joining my Patreon page and supporting the channel and responding to my questionnaire or my poll on my channel. So anyways, Lake Sinclair, I was talking about how it was in Georgia. It's going to be shallower, blah, 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 blah. And I got way sidetracked. And so what I want to do now is go over to Google Earth, though. There we go. And show you this lake. So Lake Sinclair is a pretty cool lake because it has a lot of diversity. You have really deep clear water on the lower end of the lake, as you can see here. So you have that clear water down here. Let me get rid of this. So you have some clear water down here, but you also have some kind of muddy water. If you look at different images over the years of this lake, there are times when the water's kind of clear, like up in these creeks, it's kind of clear, and then it's dirty in these arms, and so it's kind of weird because like the dirty and clear water aren't always exactly where you think on this lake, especially as you go back in time with the historical images. The water clarity will change, and a lot of times that'll actually impact how the fish set up on a given lake and at a given time. But in here you can see the water is much clearer. You can tell that because the water is darker, has a lot, almost more like a blue color. And as you move up the lake, you can see it gets a lot more brown. And so as you move way up here, you can see the water gets very dirty. But then other times of year, this main lake is actually pretty dirty, even though it's clear in this image. So that's going to affect how you fish these lakes. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this image here from... let's see, actually. Let me try to find an image from May. These post-spawn patterns. Not going to find it. Okay, cool. Well, I'll use this image from March then, because that's closer, I guess, to May than October. So anyways, if we look at this lake, you can see it is pretty dirty out on the main lake. You do have some series of bridges back in here. You have a lot of arms and fingers and stuff like that. And in the post-spawn on a lake like this, there's a couple things that I like to do. First is I like to run down to the clear water end of the lake, so the bottom end near the dam. Here's the dam of the lake here. Run to the dam, run into some of the clear pockets, and one of my favorite things to do is skip a Strike King caffeine shad and a wacky rig underneath these boat docks. And I want to take a second to show you this Strike King caffeine shad. This is not a plug for Strike King. I used to be sponsored by him, but I'm no longer, but I still love this bait. So let me see here. Let's see if I can spell caffeine because I feel like I always screw it up every time. I don't really know why I can't spell caffeine. But anyways, caffeine shad, 5-inch version. And I love throwing this bait in the smoky shad color. And this is one of my favorite baits in the post spawn. It also works pretty much year round, but definitely in the post spawn, that 5-inch caffeine shad. And I fish it kind of like a Senko. And the reason I like it so much is because, one, it catches really big fish. Because it's 5 inches long, it has a pretty big profile. And second, it's really heavy, so I can actually fish it on a bait caster, and I can skip it with a bait caster underneath these boat docks, which is really cool. And as long as you're throwing a kind of a limber rod, you don't want something super heavy. You want something that has, a 7-foot medium heavy action rod, something like that. Something that has some tip to it is good. And I fish this thing on a 6-aught extra wide gap hook. That's super important. Make sure you're throwing a 6-aught extra wide gap hook with this caffeine shad. Otherwise, you're going to lose a ton of fish. Trust me. I know from personal experience. I've lost so many 4 and 5 pounders on this bait before I switched to that 6-aught hook. And I thought that there was no way the fish would bite that 6-aught hook because it's so big and bulky, especially in the clear water. But maybe I get a few a few less bites, but I land like 90% of my fish now because this bait is really like, I guess, thick, and it's also wide north to south, I guess. If you want to, I don't know how to say it, it's tall. It's a tall bait, and so if you're not using a really big hook, the bait will scrunch up on the hook, and the fish won't get, or you won't get a good hook set on those fish because that bait will ball up on your hook and you'll lose them. So just a quick call out there. But let me switch over here. So I would throw that Strike King Caffeine Shad up underneath some of these boat docks. And what I'm really looking for is I'm looking for places that are on the mouths of pockets on secondary points. And basically, if you look back in here, you can see all these boat docks out here. And you can see here's a pocket, here's a secondary point. This is the main like creek here. And this is the main river, I would call. So this is like a main river. This is a creek arm. And a secondary point basically is anything that's kind of facing out into this main creek. And so you have these secondary points like here. You have a nice secondary point right here or right here. And I'm looking for docks that are on these secondary points outside of these spawning pockets. And I'm just going to come in, I'm going to skip every single one of these boat docks, skip that bait underneath the shade of those docks. As you come in, these creeks again, like these docks out here, as you work your way out of this pocket, as you come out of these pockets, this dock, these docks here, all going to be really, really good. These docks in here. And this works on any lake that has docks and has clear water, like water that has more than 2 foot of visibility. I've done this all the time on Lake Hamilton in Arkansas. I've done it on Wilson Lake in Alabama, where that's one right below Pickwick Lake, and I lost like 18 pounds of fish in a tournament out there doing this exact thing. They came off or broke off or jumped off. That was a bad tournament day. I caught one 4.5 pounder and watched 4 others jump off under a dock or break me off on that caffeine shad. So that was a bad day, but that happens sometimes when you're skipping boat docks. And then the other thing I would do is actually come in and fish a topwater. So fish a spook or a buzzbait. Again, just down some of these secondary points with docks around them. You can also find secondary points without docks that have like more laydowns and stuff on them, or trees. Like if we come in here, you can see that there's more trees and laydowns. Like right in here, a lot of laydowns. And again, looking for secondary points, this right here, with laydowns, fishing a buzzbait down that's going to be a really good deal for you on this part of the lake. And that's the buzzbait deal is more of an early morning thing or when it has cloud cover and wind. Not as good on those slick, calm, sunny days. If it's slick, calm, and sunny, then go fish the caffeine shed under the boat docks in the shade. The other thing I would do then is I would go over here to Navionics, or before I do that, I would run up to the dirtier part of this lake. So I run up to where I see the water has about maybe, let's say, a foot to 3 foot of visibility. So I would say in this lake in this time of year has a foot to 3 foot of visibility in this section of the lake. Obviously that could change as we look back in time, or now it's very clear here. This probably has 4 or 5 feet of visibility. Now the 3 or 4 foot of visibility is further up the lake, like back up in here. Now this part of the lake has a foot to 3 foot of visibility instead. So play it by ear, depending on what the water clarity is on your given day. But with that being said, what I'm going to be looking for is I want to find spots near the main river. And so when I say main river, I mean basically I draw a line from where the dam on the upper end of this lake starts. Oh, 1 second. I'm not over to Navionics. That would have been bad. Back over to Navionics. So here's Navionics. I'm going to start with a line from the dam at the top of the lake, and I'm going to work my way down, and I'm going to follow that creek all the way from the main drag all the way back to the dam on the bottom end of this lake. So this is the bottom end of the dam of Sinclair. This is the bottom end of the dam on Lake Oconee. I think that's how you pronounce it, hopefully. And I basically draw a line connecting those 2 dams together. That's your main river channel is the way I think about it. And so what I want to look for is spots on that main river channel. You can also go from the back of like some of these major creeks and you can follow that back out to the dam that also works to find your main river channel. But you'll find your main river channel, and what happens this time of year in May is obviously April showers bring May flowers. April showers are going to make your lakes rise up and be flooded, most likely, or a lot of times. That's going to cause these lakes to pull a lot of water through the dams. And when you have a lot of water pushing through your lake, especially on a deep, clear lake or a deeper, clear lake like Sinclair, this is going to pull the fish out of the pockets in May, and it's going to push them towards this main lake because the bait fish are going to get pulled out of those pockets by the current, because the plankton, the food's going to pull out with the current. And basically, if they're pulling a bunch of current on the lower end of this lake out of the lake, it's going to pull current this direction all the way through. It's going to pull all the food, like the plankton and stuff, out of these pockets. It's going to pull it towards the main lake, and these fish are going to set up on the main lake, and they're going to feed up. And the current, what it's going to do is it's going to push over the top of all these little points and drops and stuff like that. And so what you can look for is similar to what we were looking for over on the other lakes. The Lake Limestone is basically points and things like that. They're in anywhere from 8 to 15 feet of water, especially when that water visibility is a foot to 3 feet of water. You can find fish that, especially mid-May, water temperatures are about 73 to 80 degrees. This is when this is really what happening. And you want to find points that are flat up on top, like this, that have a lot of, or that have flat up on top. They're on the main river channel. So again, main river channel is right here. So they're on the main river channel, and they're close to that main river channel. So right here, mouth of a pocket, also mouth of a pocket. So mouth of a pocket, flat point. You see contour lines are very spread apart near the main river channel. And what happens is this main river channel is going to funnel that current. That current's going to push across the top of this point because of all that current pushing from the main river. And those bass are going to pull up on top of these points and ambush any bait fish that pull up there or any food. And these type of areas are going to be loaded. And what you can do is fish a crankbait, fish a football jig, a Carolina rig off these points. And really, points are the big deal. There's another point right in here that looks pretty good that has a nice kind of drop off of it. You want to be looking for brush piles. You want to look for rock piles, any sort of cover up on top of these points. And other examples are like a point like this, another little point that sticks out here, or a point right here. That's another good point. It's in 10 to 15 feet of water. Just keep going across. Maybe some of these humps. You have some nice humps or some nice kind of ridges out here. That could be a really good place that those fish could pull up on. Right in through here. Again, right next to that main river channel. Even a point like this that sticks out here. It's not getting as much current, but it still has some current pushing across it. And that little point right there could be very good in the mouth of a spawning pocket close to that main river. And so hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of the spots I'm kind of looking for on these lakes. And then if the water is super clear in this area, and let's say it has like, I don't know, 3 to 6 feet of visibility, for whatever reason it's really clear, what you can do is actually fish places where that creek channel swings up right against, or the main river channel swings right up against these banks. And you can find bluffier walls or steeper walls. And a lot of times in the post-spawn, when there's a lot of current and you have clearer water, those fish will pull up on these steeper bluff walls out on the main lake that have the creek channel swinging right by them. And you can catch them on a 3/4 ounce football head jig, catch them on a big topwater walking bait, just fishing parallel to those channel swings. Also fish them on a shaky head or a Ned rig, stuff like that as well. You can also catch them on deep diving crankbaits, just fishing parallel to those walls, especially on like the Tennessee River and stuff like that. So bunch of ideas there. Hopefully that kind of helps out on Lake Sinclair on where to fish. Obviously, when you're thinking about where to go, I wouldn't focus as much on an area of the lake. I would figure out what the water clarity is in your area of the lake. And if you have no practice, what I would do is just say, okay, most likely the water up on this part of the lake is going to be dirtier, just looking at the historical images year over year. And so then you can try to find good areas if you want to fish offshore, if that's your strength. Look for nice ridges, like a ridge right here, close to that main channel. Look for drops and stuff. Look for basically good contour spots in anywhere from 8 to 15 feet of water. You You got your nice like a nice point right here. Looks really good. Another point. See here. There's a lot of stuff. All these areas in the main lake. Hopefully you can figure it out from there. Hopefully from that. So now if you find yourself in the really clear water, obviously run into the back of some of these pockets. Fish that strike king caffeine shad underneath the boat docks, around the boat docks, or a topwater bait. You're gonna be in business for sure. So that's what I would do on Lake Sinclair in Georgia, and so hopefully that helps out for any upcoming fishing trips or tournaments or whatever you're going to be doing. And so last but definitely not least, we have Percy Priest Lake in Tennessee. So I'm going to take a drink of water and I'm going to stop talking for about 35 seconds because my brain is about to explode because I've been talking so much. So I'll switch over to this other lake real quick and then I'm going to get a drink of water and take a quick 30-second break. Hopefully that is okay with everyone. Okay, I'm back. Let me scroll through some comments real quick. Bear with me for a minute. Oh, there's so many comments. You guys are going crazy. I'll get all these comments after the. Actually, I have to get going pretty soon here. I'll try to answer a couple of them real quick right after the stream, but then I have to get going here about 10 minutes after the stream. Tim Russell said, "Do a great job. Gonna hire you soon for Pickwick round counts. Awesome. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate that. Glad you enjoy the content. And again, thank you so much for the super chat." See, here's so many questions here. I'll try to get through all these. I'm just kind of trying to read through any that are jumping off the page at me. Okay. Where people are dropping out like flies, so I'm going to jump in. Bruce Clayton asking, so I still have confusion about how deep I can expect to catch fish offshore in water clarity. Say water clarity is 2 to 4 feet. Good question there, Bruce. Basically, the way I think about it, I'm going to try to come up with a video that kind of guidelines this in general, but the way I think about it is if the water visibility is a foot or less, in the summertime, those bass are never going to get deeper than 10 feet of water. So if you have a foot of visibility or less, the bass won't get deeper than 10 feet in the wintertime, in the summertime, pretty much ever. And that's pretty much a solid rule of thumb that works all the time. It's maybe not 100% accurate all the time, but that gets like 90% of your cases. If you have a foot to 2 foot of visibility, those fish may go down to 12 to 13 feet, maybe 15 feet if you have like 2 foot of visibility exactly. But they won't go too much deeper than that. If you have 2 to 3 foot of visibility, those fish may go down to 15 to 20 feet and they'll stop at about 20, 21 feet, just from my experience around here in Arkansas and Texas, places like that. Then once you get past that 3 foot of visibility, those fish will get down pretty much as deep as the thermocline. And I'll make a video on the thermocline as well. Hopefully that all makes, all that stuff before makes sense. But the thermocline is basically a place where the cool water and the warm water on the lake meet, and the bass will never go below the thermocline. And you can find that on your lake using your electronics, and I'll make a video about that this summer, so that'll clear that all up and hopefully be helpful. But basically those fish won't go deeper than the thermocline on the deep clear lakes. So rules of thumb there, hopefully to follow, is a foot or less, don't fish deeper than 10 feet. A foot to 2 feet, don't fish deeper than 15. 2 feet to 3 feet, don't fish deeper than 20. And then after 3 foot of visibility, only fish deep at the thermocline. So hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully that'll help you out. Let's see here. Let's see here. Okay, got a bunch of other questions, but I'll get to this in a second, guys. I want to jump into the last lake before I run out of time here because I have to jump to another one-on-one fishing lesson actually right after this. Book through my website. If you guys do want to book a one-on-one fishing lesson with me where I can help you with practicing for upcoming tournaments, breaking down your lakes, one-on-one, showing you areas, how I would approach the areas. I get really in depth with you on how to approach a lake rather than just saying here's some general areas to fish or some spots. We can discuss the strategy of actually figuring out how to fish that lake and get the most out of it. So definitely something that I recommend if you're a really serious angler and you like the content. And the people who have done my one-on-one lessons have loved them. And I actually have some testimonials on my page if you want to check that out. And so other than that, I'm going to jump to this last lake while we still have a few minutes, which is Percy Priest Lake in Tennessee. Okay, so Percy Priest Lake is in Tennessee. It's just outside Nashville. If you guys look at right here, got Nashville right here, and so we actually have Old Hickory, and we have a bunch of other lakes around the area, and so we got Cumberland over here. So some really good lakes to fish in this area, and basically Percy Jackson is a deep, clear lake. It has smallmouth, it has largemouth. I don't know if it has spots, but I know it has smallmouth and largemouth at least. And if we switch over to Navionics or to Google Earth really quick, you'll be able to see that. Oh, 1 second. Fly on over to Percy Priest Lake. I actually drove by this when I was in Nashville, and it looked good. And I was really upset that I didn't get to have a chance to fish it. I didn't bring my boat to the Classic when I was in Nashville for the Bassmaster Classic, and so I was like, man, I really want to get out on this lake. But as you can see, it's really deep and clear on the lower end of this lake. Maybe has 6 to 7 feet of visibility down here. And as you move up the lake, you get a lot dirtier water. You can see because it's a lot more brown here as opposed to the darker blue up here. And so in general, if you're going to want to smallmouth fish on this lake, you're going to want to stay by the deeper, clear water down by the dam. This is the dam here, actually on the north end of the lake. And then if you want to fish for largemouth, focus on largemouth, go to the dirtier end of the lake where you have less than 3 foot of visibility. That's where you'll find the largemouth. And then if you are trying to target fish in May, so for the post-spawn, because right now Nashville, probably going to be pretty warm. There's probably bass spawning right now, and then they're going to be getting to the post-spawn here in the next 2 to 3 weeks. They're probably still spawning pretty hard right now. And so for spawning locations, I've kind of covered that in my last few live streams, so I'm going to try to give you a quick overview, but I did cover that a lot in my last live stream, so go check those out if you want to learn more. Also covered a lot of spawning areas and stuff in my recent videos. But basically, the smallmouth are probably going to be just finishing up spawning right now. Smallmouth spawn a little bit earlier than the largemouth. They'll spawn in about 58 to 59 degree water, and they'll spawn off of these like deeper banks that are protected from the wind, so like off these deeper banks, behind some of these islands, basically anywhere that's close to deep water, but it's protected from the really strong winds from the main lake, like behind this island, down this stretch here, even back in behind some of these banks here. And you can find some protected areas if you look here, even down these banks that are protected because there's islands here, so you won't get them hit by the west wind, the east wind, south, and the north won't affect them that much. And so like these type of banks are going to be really good for you to find those spawning smallmouth. And those smallmouth will spawn out as deep as 12 to 15 feet of water. And that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand about smallmouth is they'll spawn if you have 20 feet if they have 20 feet of visibility in your lake, the smallmouth will spawn in 20 feet because that sunlight will penetrate all the way down that deep. And if you only have 10 feet of visibility, they may spawn only 10 to 12 feet deep. And if you have 6 feet of visibility, they may spawn 6 to 8 feet deep. They normally spawn a little bit deeper than you can actually visibly see sometimes, but you can find beds like way off of these banks out here. Like back in here, you can find them way off the bank, down some of this, steeper chunk rock and stuff like that. These flat chunk rock banks are really good on these lakes around here in Tennessee because they provide really good flat areas for these bass to spawn on. And this is actually a bank that looks very similar to where some of the guys were catching him. Andrew Upshaw actually won a tournament on Cherokee Lake, catching spawning smallmouth down banks look very similar to this, just pitching a wacky worm down these flat slate rock banks they're very flat and they have to have a slate rock. You don't want a super steep drop. You want a flatter shelf those smallmouth can spawn on, but that's a good looking smallmouth spawning bank here on Percy Priest. And then as you are moving around the lake, you can get to the dirtier water. You can run into some of these dirty water pockets and stuff like that. You can find largemouth spawning in the back of these pockets, spawning on some of these rockier banks down the way here. You might be able to find some fish spawning even down on some of this kind of chunk rock bank, because they'll kind of stage here in the spawn, and some bass will actually spawn still down this chunk rock bank. Or you can find them back in these shallow pockets, spawning around laydowns and stumps and things like that. And a lot of times, if you're looking for beds, one of the easiest ways to find beds on your lake, especially if you are just in the middle of the spawn right now, is to run into the back of any pocket you can find, and then run to the very back in the back center and look for any type of laydown or any type of rock in the very, very back, like the shallowest water you can get, and you want to look for the beds there in the very center of these pockets. And these are a lot of the beds that get ignored by fishermen, because a lot of times they're looking for beds down these banks, and sometimes these beds, the bass will spawn on beds out here in the center of these cuts, and they'll spawn around any kind of brush or rock out there. And actually was on Table Rock this last weekend, and I saw a ton of males on the beds. The females hadn't moved up yet, but I saw a ton of males on beds down in 6 to 7 feet of water, because it had like 10 foot of visibility there, and they were in the very center of these pockets. And there was a huge tournament the day before, and so I'm sure a lot of the bass had got picked off, and I saw a ton of empty beds up by the shore. But all of the beds that were out here in the center of these cuts still had male bass that were either cruising or locked down, because a lot of fishermen just fished right over the top of them or completely missed them. And that's more of a deal when you have the clear water. Obviously, when the water's really dirty, it has like a foot of visibility. Like if we go way up the lake, those fish will be a lot shallower where they're spawning. So if you get to like a dirty pocket like this, these fish may spawn like right up against the bank, against some of these trees or these stumps. Obviously, this lake is a little bit drawn down, so it normally is at this pool. But that is a kind of look at some of the spawning areas. And then as far as post-spawn areas go out here, a couple things I want to call out. One, if you're wanting to find some good post-spawn largemouth on this lake, I would focus on some of these creeks back up in this area of the lake, back in here and back in here. And one thing I actually noticed as I'm zooming around in here over the years is there's potentially, I don't know if this is true, it looks like it's true, it looks like there's some sort of grass back in here. And it looks like there's some sort of dead, it kind of looks dead here, but there's some sort of grass that's growing back in these pockets. And I don't know if this grass is always here. I didn't see it like the next year in April. It could be here. It could be like kind of underwater. It's really hard to tell. If there's any grass on your lake in the post spawn, that is an automatic must fish. Bank grass in the post spawn is a guarantee for catching 3 and 4 pounders anywhere in the country. Whether you have super clear water or dirty water, the post spawn and shallow shoreline grass go together. Like, well, JT, you tell them in the comments what goes together just like grass and post spawn bass. But other than that, we have, some really good shoreline grass, I think, back in these pockets. And basically you can fish the shoreline grass with a buzzbait, with a frog, in the dirtier water lakes, or a swim jig if you have like 2 foot of visibility or less. If you have super clear water, you can catch those same fish on still a buzzbait, like a white buzzbait, or on that caffeine shad, striking caffeine shad, or just a fluke style bait. So that works out really well down these shallower pockets. And then other places you can definitely check out are still just the secondary points on the mouths of these bays. So as you move out of these bays, looking for these secondary points that come out here, these are all going to be good. And in the dirtier water out here, there's a lot of good rock. You can catch those fish cranking, fishing a crankbait down these flatter banks in those rocks with a square bill, fish a spinnerbait on windy days around these points and stuff like that. That will work really well. And then I'm running close on time here, so the last thing I would recommend doing is, if you do want to catch some smallmouth, I know I haven't looked at Navionics at all for this lake. I've just been stuck on Google Earth. But if we skip over to Navionics, one thing you can do in May that's really good is you can go to the lower end of these lakes, and in mid-May to the very beginning of June on these Tennessee lakes, and a lot of the lakes that have big smallmouth in them that are like a deep, clear reservoir, you can go down to the lower end of the lake right after the smallmouth get off the beds. And what happens in the summertime is these smallmouth will set up on the main river channel or out here in the middle of the lake, and they'll just chase shad all summer long, and it's almost impossible to catch them because they're just migrating and moving around the lake. But right before they get out there to those super deep areas not in the middle of the lake, and they transition from their spawning areas out to the deep water, you can find some really good smallmouth on a lot of these points, like a point like this right here that sticks out here that drops into 39. You can find them up on top of these points in May. You can find them up on top of these shallow humps, or even like a point that sticks out right here that has the fish marker on it. You can find them on there's a nice little ledge that sticks out right here that could be really good. There's kind of an indent and then a little high spot there. Or you can kind of roll down the lake and you can find some of these even deeper points that get down here into 40 feet of water. And what these smallmouth will do is they'll just cruise down around these points, feeding up on shad and stuff like that. And you can find them grouped up on these points in schools of 50. And my two favorite baits for fishing off these deeper points and deeper drops in May is a spy bait. Basically, what you do is just go around here, graph around, drive around till you see a wad of fish on your graph and some bait in mid-May, maybe end of May, and then fish that spy bait out off these points, across the tips of the points, stuff like that. And it only happens for 2 weeks out of the year. It's a very, very small window for this. And these bass will move quick. Those smallmouth will move quick from these shallow areas to the deep water. So 2 days, or the first 2 days, they may be in 13 feet of water. Next 2 days, they might be in 20 feet of water. The next 2 days, they might be in 30 feet of water. Then they're out here in 40 feet of water. And then after they hit that about 40-foot zone, they'll be suspended over the 40 feet of water a lot of times. They'll push out here and they'll just be in the center of these creeks out here, and you'll never find them consistently the rest of the year. But they will group up for whatever reason in those few weeks right after the spawn. There's actually a really nice little high spot, little point off this island. That looks really good. I would fish that. And right here, the saddle between these two islands got a high spot, a little ditch running through. Money. I said that really weird. I apologize to everyone listening to this stream for that. And then another little high spot right here. So otherwise, that's it, guys, for Percy Priest Lake. I want to get through some questions because I know you guys are going through the questions. I do have to bounce right at 8:10 because I have a one-on-one fishing lesson I have to jump to. But let me try to get through as many as I can. I'm going to do a lightning round on questions. I'm only hitting the at Fish the Moment questions, but you guys are awesome leaving that for me. Wow, there's so many questions. Okay. If I don't get your question, I am so sorry. I just am not able to get to everyone with limited time. I got carried away talking about the lakes. I got too much to talk about, guys. I don't know why. I don't know how I don't keep running out of stuff to talk about in these streams. I talk for an hour every week about fishing, and I feel like I only get to a 30th of what I want to talk about every week. I have so much in my head. But anyways, let's see here. Got Bruce's question there. See here. Sorry, guys. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna keep talking while I'm scrolling through these questions. Okay. First one, Keith the Trucker says, "Hey man, would you be willing to come to Stockton Lake, about an hour and 10 north from Table Rock to fish for a day with me?" Yeah, I think that would definitely be fine. It's an hour 10, so that'd be about 3 hours for me. That's not too bad. I do, on my website, what Keith is probably talking about is I do a 2-hour radius of my lake, but if I'm definitely going to be going in your boat, I don't mind driving 3 hours up to a lake that's 3.5 hours away for the day, no problem. I wouldn't be able to do it with my boat just because the gas would kill me and just driving that much at the boat, but I don't mind driving out 3 hours. If you do want to schedule a lesson, an on-the-water fishing lesson, I don't call it a guided fishing trip because I'm not going to be taking you to fish, but I'll teach you how to break down lakes and how to find fish read your electronics, all that stuff. If you want me to do that, for sure, if it's within like 3.5 hours, definitely can swing that. So just send me a message, Keith, at fishthemoment1@gmail.com, or send me a message on Patreon or on Facebook at Fish the Moment, Instagram at Fish the Moment, whatever you need there, and definitely can set that up. And also, I'm going to be trying to travel to different parts of the country, and thinking of trying to make a trip to Texas and a trip over to either Georgia or Tennessee at some point this year, so that I can do some. I have these fishing classes that I'm thinking about offering, which I'll talk about more later. Some of the cool stuff that I was mentioning earlier. So a lot of cool things coming from the Fishing Moment channel. Plus, I'll be posting way more videos. Don't worry, guys. Starting soon, I'm posting a lot more videos, so no worries about that. So yeah, Keith, just hit me up there. No B small motor cross says, have you ever played with C maps and the Genesis mapping? Navionics and its users haven't made any headway on the reservoir I frequent. I have the C map for it. I've seen C map. It looks really cool. I know it's like a Lowrance thing, and I use the Lake Master from Humminbird, which is also really good. Normally the Lake Master and the C maps are way better in general than Navionics on specific lakes, though Navionics coverage is way more broad and covers a lot more lakes. So I focus on Navionics for this stuff, and Navionics will get you like 75% of the way there. But if you want to find the sneaky holes that this sounds so weird again. I apologize again. The sneaky spots that the guys are fishing, that guys don't find on Navionics, check out the C map and the Lake Master. Oh man, when I talk for an hour and a half, guys, it goes off the rails. Or an hour straight. That is no bueno. Anyways, see here. Find the next question. Let's see here. And then Keith asks again, have you seen a difference in the Navionics Platinum versus regular? I bought both. They don't look that different. I don't really know. I know that there's some difference. I think there's like a 3D mapping or something. I don't know. I would prefer, instead of just getting the Navionics Platinum, to then go to the C map or the Lake Master chip. Brandon Dad says, or Dade says, how would you approach a power plant lake in the spring through summer? Brandon, what I would do there is I would try to get in the power plant, the discharge from the power plant actually, which is weird to think, but that current actually will generate some activity in the fish, even though it's warm water pushing through there. That current will put oxygen in the water, and those fish will still stay there. So either get right up in the discharge or get as far away from the hot water as possible. So get to the coolest part of that lake possible, and then just fish around there. You're going to have your best success in those two things. B. Saunders says, if you have a bunch of beds with fish on them marked today in the tournament on weekend, and you get a major storm with lots of rain, what is that going to do to the fish? That happened actually this last weekend on Table Rock. That I was out there, and the fish were moving up to the beds like crazy the week before, and then the day I went fishing was right after a cold front, and it went from being 70 to 80 degrees every single day with lows in the 60s for like a week and a half straight to a cold front, and basically it was 40 degrees, like 39 to 40 degrees when I woke up in the morning, and it warmed up to about like low 60s, and you guys probably in this area know it was a bad cold front, and that pushed a ton of fish off the beds, plus it got all the male bass that were locked down in the beds completely screwed up, and they weren't locked down. They never caught a single bed fish. But in those cases, what I do is I actually focus on fishing pre-spawn bass or post-spawn bass. So I try to look for the secondary points and stuff like that, and try to focus on catching the pre-spawn or the post-spawn bass that have already spawned or still haven't spawned yet, and just kind of ignore the spawning fish for that given day, just because those fish are going to get so messed up from that weird weather. So switch back to the post-spawn or the pre-spawn patterns when you get weird conditions during the spawn. Okay. See here. From the Edge of the Ledge said, Fishing Moment, Bobby White had a good question. How do you know when to fish docks or go deep? That's a really good question. I would say in general, when I fish docks, when it's really, put it this way, I fish docks when I can't find a good offshore bite. I prefer fishing offshore because, one, it's going to be a lot more consistent in general. when you're fishing in tournaments or around a lot of pressure. So there's always going to be a ton of guys that are fishing boat docks, but the offshore bite is a little bit harder to find, especially in the post spawn, because there's very few spots those fish get on. And don't get discouraged if you fish offshore in the springtime and you don't catch them, or in the post spawn you don't find them or catch them right away. A lot of times the post spawn, there may be 6 areas in the whole lake where you find a big group of fish. If you can find one of those 6 areas, though, you'll catch 20 pounds. And so it takes a lot of effort. And so in my practice days, I spend all my days in the post spawn literally just looking for offshore fish. And then if I don't find them, that's when I just go skip docks and I try to just figure it out during the day, or fish like shallow grass, stuff like that. So that's kind of what I do. If I can't find the offshore fish, docks are my backup. But if you like fishing docks and skipping docks, go for it, because you can catch good fish as well, especially if you're not as confident on the offshore fishing. Okay, did I get through all the questions? Maybe I did. I probably missed a ton. This has been skipping around, guys. So if I miss a bunch of questions, I apologize. But I am right at time, which worked out perfect. And thanks for calling up that question again, from the edge to the ledge. Appreciate that. JP, saying, I don't know if it will stop raining in Illinois. Sorry about that, man. I hope that it'll stop raining for you. But right now, the weather's been pretty good in Arkansas, but it's been weird. Like every weekend, it rains or is storming or cold front or something, and that sucks, because like it's beautiful all week, and I get off work and it's terrible. And I know you guys all know what I'm talking about. Jerry Marshall says, "Good work, Johnny. Come to Mid Tennessee. I'll take you fishing on Percy and Old Hickory. You might have to chip in on gas." Haha. Appreciate that, Jerry. And then Bruce saying, "Good to hear your info as always." And then just a bunch of people saying thank you. Angling Adventures says, if you're scouting a lake like Lake Winnebago, it's a big shallow basin, do you prefer down or side imaging? If I was fishing Lake Winnebago, especially if you're fishing like out there for the smallmouth with all the wind and stuff, I would side scan, and I would just side scan for boulders and clumps of grass out there, and just put your side scan on. Like, actually, one thing that Aaron Martins did that was really cool back in the day is he would actually extend his transducer down a little bit further down, and he would drive with his boat on plane at like 30 miles an hour, and you could still get the side scan on both sides, and you would scan for giant boulders running at 30 miles an hour, which is really cool. You also look for like big depth changes, because a lot of times like a subtle depth change from 5 feet of water down to 7 feet of water over a period of time actually holds those smallmouth. It's not always just the sharp drops, and so he found fish on those. You can also see the bottom composition changes, so you can set your graphs to be like red-green color palette and see the transitions from the gravel to the rock, stuff like that. So I definitely love the side scan on those wide lakes. You can just cover more water, and a lot of times it doesn't matter with the smallmouth if you see them in the grass or see the fish. You're just looking for those big boulders, the small ridges or small drops, stuff like that. Those smallmouth will pull up on. So that's hopefully that answers your question. So other than that, thank you guys so much for joining the stream. I got to jump here. I got to jump to another lesson right away. So thanks again for joining the stream. Thank you to everyone who donated tonight's super chats. Bruce Clayton, Siren, Michael, and Tim. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who's been supporting me on my Patreon page, on my website, and on the YouTube channel, commenting and watching. So thanks again, everyone, for watching. Hope you have a great night. Hope you catch a ton of fish this weekend for those of you who can get on the lake. And other than that, I'll see you next week, same time, 7 p.m. Central Time. And that's it. See y'all later.